Welcome to RuralStrong, where we talk real challenges and bold solutions in rural economic development. I'm your host, Joe Barker. Let's get into it. This is Joe Barker, your podcast host, and we are broadcasting today from Southwest Tennessee Development District podcast studio in beautiful downtown Jackson, Tennessee. And we've got a great guest today. Our guest is Deb Brown, and Deb is a passionate champion for rural communities and an unapologetic believer in the power of small towns to thrive. That's my kind of person. As the co-founder of SaveYour.Town, Deb has spent the past decade teaming up with Becky McCrae to deliver hands-on, actionable solutions that help rural places dream big and get things done. Her practical, upbeat style energizes leaders and doers nationwide. And Deb Brown, welcome to RuralStrong.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe. Happy to be here. And what a nice introduction. Thank you.
Well, it's just the Southern thing, as you found out down there in Biloxi. And
Yes, sir.
We won't throw you too many hard questions today. They'll be mostly softballs, but we're excited that you're here. I know that people all across the country know you and Becky and the work that you do, and I've read a lot of your articles and read books, and I'm really impressed with, number one, your passion for small towns, and certainly to me, that's the backbone of America.
I absolutely agree with you. I grew up in a town, outside of a town of 141 people. I'm a farmer's daughter originally from Iowa, and I've been in love with small towns forever. I'm one of those back road travelers. If I can get somewhere on the back roads, that's how I'm going.
Well, the first thing I want to talk about, everything I read about you, and when I talk to people and I mention your name, Webster City, Iowa always comes up, and what you were able to do in that community that, like many of our communities all across the nation, saw factories leave, their largest employers move offshore, and they had all these buildings, and it was woe is me. And I want you to talk a little bit about what brought you to Webster City, Iowa, and just get into the story of how you tackle that challenge of filling these empty buildings.
Absolutely. I love talking about this story because it's not just Webster City. It's a lot of small towns the factory towns. They've lost their major employer, and when that's all you know, that's all you know. I ended up in Webster City because I became the chamber director there about 2 years after that major manufacturer left town. And they'd had about 6 years knowing it was coming, and they were cutting staff, but it's still just that big shock. And when I went for my job interview there, actually, I counted 14 empty buildings downtown in a town of about 8,000 people. That's a lot of empty buildings. And I figured if they gave me the job, they were going to want me to help fill those buildings, right? And of course, that's exactly what they wanted. And one of the guys on my board said, "So Deb, what are you going to do about filling these empty buildings?" And my response to him was, "What are we going to do about filling these empty buildings? This has got to be a community-wide effort." So I thought about it for a little while. I didn't know any better. That's kind of the benefits of being in a new job, right? I thought those buildings should be showcased because the possibilities were endless on what could happen in an empty building. And downtown, some were old and had a great history to it. Some were relatively new. And I just knew if we could figure out how to showcase and show off these buildings, we could really make a big difference. So I came up with the idea of the Empty Buildings Tour. Pretty simple. 12 of those buildings ended up being on that tour. We did it about a month after I started my job there. And people came. It was an open event, so you can come and go as you wished. And we got more people involved in doing this. It wasn't just all me. The realtors got on board. There were a couple of building owners that participated. The city manager and one of the construction company guys walked through an empty building with me and showed me, okay, if they fix this, then it's going to help keep this building alive for a long time. I wasn't asking them for permission to do the tour. We'd already scheduled it, but I wanted them to be involved too because it's their town as well.
Let me ask you something right quick on that. Were most of the buildings owned by people who lived around Webster City, or were there several absentee owners?
There were a couple of absentee owners,
Okay.
but our realtors really stood up and they knew how to contact those people. That's why there were 12 buildings, not 14, because not everybody said yes. And that's okay. We went with what we had, right? During the tour, 44 people showed up, came and went, that we counted, that signed up. And you wouldn't think that's a whole lot of people, but it actually was, because the biggest secret about this tour was we just kept talking about it. The local newspaper, every time somebody came in and rented a building, came down for the ribbon cutting and took a lot of pictures and introduced the new people that were in that store. The radio station talked about it. The people that had been on that tour, one of my favorite stories, the old public health building, huge building, built, I think, in 1912, was available because they had built a new building. And one of the ladies that worked in a store downtown called her pastor, who was looking for a church. They were just meeting at different churches because they were relatively new. And they ended up buying that building. So part of it's sanctuary, part of it is education, is helping students that need help. And another part is for meals and dinners and gatherings and church programs, that kind of thing. So not only did that building fill it, have a church fill it, but it is also another building in the community that's available for people to use. The movie theater. My first week on the job, the movie theater closed. That made me crazy. But you know what? For a lot of people in town, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And what happened is we called everybody and said, hey, you want to come talk about how we can save the movie theater? So we met at the middle school. Again, not asking for permission, got permission from the school people to have the meeting, but that was it. And the gym was full. So many people came because they wanted to save the movie theater. So we knew we had a good idea. A group of people volunteered. They set up a 501c3, collected $5 bills, money from all over the place. The alumni clubs really came in and started buying the theater seats because we were selling them for $300 a piece, not the actual seat, but they got a plaque on the back of it. So that became a little contest. The high school kids made movie trailers about the sale of the building and about the fundraising. In 18 months, $250,000 was raised to save the movie theater. And in fact, that's what happened. Now, you're an economic development guy. Let me tell you my favorite part of the story. The group that had the 501c3 decided they were going to hire staff instead of asking for volunteers to run it because they wanted to contribute to the workforce of the city of Webster City. That to me is a big deal. Volunteers get tired and it's hard to replace them, but allowing someone to have a job and learn and become a part of their city is a big deal. So in any case, in 18 months, 10 of the 12 buildings were filled on the Empty Buildings tour. Those are good numbers. We like those numbers a lot.
Great numbers. Great numbers.
Yep. And it's because we just kept talking. We shared that news all over the state. people picked it up. We were in Natchez, Mississippi, talked about it. And a place in Australia sent us a note and said, we do tours all the time for visitors. Now we've added an empty building onto our tours too, because we want to show off our empty buildings. I thought, well, that's just brilliant, isn't it? You're going to take me around to see stuff in an empty building? I like that.
Well,
So, yeah.
and in listening to you talk about this, it really has to be a real community effort, doesn't it, to make something like this work? Because, if the locals don't buy in, none of this happens.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But somebody has to believe it's possible. That's the first important step. And it was just me, and I didn't know the town, but I knew that we could show those buildings off. And one of the ways we got the community more involved, the old fellas that go have coffee at 6 a.m.,
Yeah,
the grouchy Gusses.
I'm one of them. Thank you.
Our group said, the group of guys told me, oh, we make up lies just to see if the rumors spread, right? It made me laugh so hard. So I went and talked to them and was telling them about the buildings and what was available. And one fella turns to me and he goes, Deb, nobody's going to show up. Why would they care? That doesn't make any sense to me. And I looked at him and I said, where's your daughter live? Doesn't she live in Des Moines, which is the state capital? He goes, yeah. I'm like, what would it be like if she were able to come home and start her own business in one of those empty buildings and brought your grandkids with her? How would that change your life? And he got it. You could see the light bulb going on. He understood, okay, it's not for me, but it's for our community and it's for our kids. Let's bring our kids home. That helped. That coffee club, those boys told everybody.
Well, I've often said, Dale, when I was a mayor in a small town, that more projects were killed at the coffee shop than any other place. And in fact, I heard about projects coming out of the coffee shop that I'd never heard of before. So that's sort of the way it works. Let me ask you this. I know we have listeners out there, and as you're talking, they're probably in their mind saying, that's my town right now with the empty buildings. What's your advice? How do you get started on this, and what would be your advice to either that chamber director or that economic developer in that community that's got these empty buildings and says, we need to do something?
Well, yeah, great. Economic developer or chamber person, but it can be anybody. It can be that local coffee club that might want to do something. So the first thing you have to do is a little inventory. What do you have? What buildings are actually for sale? What's there, right? So you take some pictures and you make a list and you find out who owns it and you get the history of the building. Believe me, every small town has some people that know the histories of the buildings downtown. And then you come together, bring all your friends. You meet, you gather. You don't go to City Hall and meet. You go to the backyard, your backyard porch, and sit out there and maybe have a beer and talk about what you're going to do to create a tour. And who's going to share it online? And who's going to call the state representatives? It should not be one person doing all the work. There are plenty of small but meaningful steps that anybody in the community can take, and encourage that. Those small steps really matter. I have a friend, Miss Daisy, she's got rheumatoid arthritis. She lives down in Springfield, Missouri. Everything we do, she shares online because she can't really leave her house, but she's on her computer all day long and loves to share good stories. Those kind of folks matter too. There is somebody that can pick up the phone and call her phone chain, because they're still out there, and say, hey, I hear they're doing a tour and that's on Saturday. Can you come pick me up? I want to see those buildings. And word spreads like wildfire.
I love the story about the movie theater, where I grew up in Savannah, Tennessee. Every Saturday, they had a matinee, they had a Western that played every Saturday, and that's when they still played cartoons before the feature. And every Saturday, the kids and lots of us would walk to the movie theater, and we'd go see the Western. And eventually, what happened there was what happened to other places. The theater did shut down, but the city got real involved and renovated the theater, and it's not a movie theater anymore, but they have local plays and events there, and they restored the marquee that was in front of it. And so it does. I think there's nothing that brings a sense of pride to a community like that old movie theater that has so much history to it.
Yeah, indeed. And the stories that are told, I'm a huge believer in sharing stories that you hear, because people want that sense of community. They want to know they live in a place that provides experiences, not just the ability to go see a movie, but the ability to go out and have dinner across the street first and then go over and see a movie with your friends. Now it becomes an evening out, not just, hey, I'm going to the movie. So how you share what you have in your community is really important. Why should people shop downtown? What's the point? Well, I go to the hardware store because they show me how to use this kind of paint and they do demonstrations. That's making it more interactive. That's making it an experience. And our small town rural people, they know how to do stuff. It's time to start sharing it and getting people to come in and learn too.
Well, I'm out here listening, Deb, and I'm saying, this sure sounds good, and this is wonderful. But, there had to be a financial piece to this, because if you're going to start a business, you have to have some financial backing, and particularly if you need to renovate an older building to your needs. So did the financial community get involved in this?
Not at first. But that's okay. They didn't need to be, because if you have an idea, you don't go from having an idea to spending $100,000 on a building and another $100,000 to bring it up to code before you've even tried your business out, right? So what we worked with one building owner that had about 4 buildings downtown, and she put 3 of them into the incubator project. Now, how that worked, I made it up, but it worked out really well. The first 3 months of rent were free. The renter had to pay all the utilities. So that's one thing the owner didn't have to pay. And then reduce rent for the rest of the year. The chamber got on board to help teach this new business marketing. And the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, got on board to work with that new business on how to create a business plan. So working together and trying your idea out, that actually worked. One woman came from the city of Chicago, and her husband wanted to create a little retail store that sold gym shoes and hats, really a teen store, and some gear, sports gear kind of stuff. So she tried the incubator space, and a year later, it was so successful, they bought the big building next door. And they helped other people with their ideas too. So it just, domino effect. It just kept going. There was one person that had a thrift store on consignment. And after 3 months, they took everything and left town, disappeared. You don't win them all. And it was only 3 months, it wasn't 3 years. It could have been a lot worse. There was a grocery store across the street from one of the buildings that had a huge back room, but they were saving for a commercial hood because they wanted to put a restaurant in the back of the store. So they went into one of the empty buildings that was a restaurant and sold, they were a Mexican grocery store, so they sold Mexican food. They got to train their waiting staff. They got to try new recipes. They got to test their hours out to see what worked for the community. It was very interactive with the town because they wanted to know what people wanted to eat when they came there. And today they have a beautiful restaurant behind their store. So that spot tried several different things and new businesses came out of it. And I believe the building's for sale now.
Okay, and that brings up the next question. I know you no longer live in Webster City, and we had the pandemic, and a lot of pressures were put on small businesses. But are most of these buildings still have occupants now?
Yes, actually, they do.
Great.
They do. I still have friends there. I've been down here in Mississippi for about 3 years. And I still have friends there that tell me, oh, so and so is doing this. And I read the local newspaper and I
Sure.
listen to the radio. You want to stay up to date on what's happening, right?
Well, that's great. All right, let's transition a little bit. And another something that you're involved in that intrigues me is the ideal friendly method. And let's talk about that. How did you get involved in that project?
So the idea friendly method was created by Becky McCrae. The two of us created SaveYour.Town. And she'd been in local business herself. They had a cattle ranch, they had a liquor store at one time. I mean, she knew what she was doing. She learned along the way too. And the method itself is really simple. Everybody's got an idea, right? Usually a big idea, something they'd like to see in their town. So what you do is you gather your crowd around that idea, and then you start building connections because you and your crowd don't know everything. You got to find some people that know other stuff, and you work your way to that big idea by taking small steps. So it sounds really easy, doesn't it?
Well, it sounds easy,
It
but
actually is pretty easy. Let me give you an example. So I was at a conference and one woman stood up and said, you know what, I want to have a swimming pool for our kids because the old pool in their town was closed. That's my big idea. I'm like, okay, well, who thinks like you? She said, well, my neighbor, my sister-in-law, and some people at church. I'm like, great, invite them over for, coffee or something in a hot summer day and take a garden hose, an old one, and put some holes in it, hook it up to the faucet, and you've just created a sprinkler system. See if the kids show up. See if your friends can bring their kids. See if it's a valuable idea just to start by getting your kids wet. And that's what they ended up doing. It's interesting because they knew to get from there to a pool was a huge step, right? Because you don't just get from there to a pool. But they learned what they had to do to perhaps get a water park because they found out that was more desirable than a big pool was to have that same kind of water park that has those walk-through sprinkler kind of things. And they did the research and found out how much it was going to cost. And somebody knew about this grant and somebody knew about that. Because it wasn't a board having meetings after meetings after meetings trying to figure out what they're going to do and who they're going to ask for money from. It was just a group of people that wanted to get things done. That's how it happens. Somebody writes the grant. Somebody calls the state legislature person, right? Hey, do you guys have any money down there? This is what we want to do. If you don't ask, you won't know. And that's how you accomplish things, taking those small steps.
and I know you've been involved in a lot of innovative projects, just like the empty building tour. How do you react to what we call the cave people, the citizens against virtually everything? And I know in the community where I lived, a small town, we had several tribes of cave people there, and they were very vocal. So how do you react to those when you've got this project and you found some people that support it, and you have to overcome that?
Or not, you can just ignore them because what they end up doing is stop talking to you. If you're not talking back, if you ask them the kindly, hey, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything. That's kind of a small town attitude. And what happens is quite a few of these people are behind the fence watching what you're doing. And as that project starts to materialize, you'd be amazed at the number of those folks that actually come over and help or have something constructive to say about it. For the really loud ones, If you have a city council meeting, I always tell people show up with 10 of your friends. Don't show up just by yourself. Show up with 10 of your friends and have your 5 minute say, because you're going to be louder than the two negative Nellies that are there.
Well, it reminds me back when I was a mayor, the council decided that we were going to build a new library. The old library was in terrible shape, and of course, it was a financial commitment, and not everybody on the council was for it. And we had one particular person that was adamant against spending money to do this. But to make a long story short, the library got built, and it looked beautiful, and we were probably a month from opening the new library, and I never will forget, he came to my office and he says, hey, are you going to have one of those plaques on the front of the building that like says who was the mayor and who the council members were and have the date? And I said, we sure are. And he says, are you going to have my name on there? And I said, absolutely. I said, alphabetical order, and you're at the top. And it's what you were talking about. Once it got built and he could see it and he could see the excitement in the community. All right, let me ask you this. What do you see as the biggest challenges many times that rural communities face in really just getting positive vibes in their community?
Well, and if you've seen one small town, you've only seen one small town. It's different everywhere. We do the survey of rural challenges, and we've been doing that for 10 years now. I can tell you housing, childcare, our young people are leaving. Those are all concerns that the majority of small towns are faced with. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking me.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is these things that just seem to overwhelm people in small towns, that they think, we'll never get out of this. We'll never get out of this is I think, one of the greatest challenges we have.
We talked to some people just this week from Montana, from the extension office. They're doing an event out there, and we were talking about how one community had got some grant funding, and they had a housing issue, and they had a not enough people in town issue, and they just wanted to build a brand new subdivision. That's what they wanted to do with the money, right? And everybody else was like, how, what? We don't know who's going to, what? That doesn't, yeah, right? And so we were talking and said, how you start that small. You go to an empty lot with cardboard and you lay it out like a house, and you walk people through your idea. Here's the first bedroom. Here's the second bedroom. What would you put in this house? Do we need fireplaces? The point is to get people talking and bring people together and have positive conversations, not the negative ones. Bravo that they wanted to build a new subdivision. That didn't work for that community, but they didn't know that. So one way to learn that is to take smaller steps. One thing we always recommend is coffee and calendars. So we did it in Webster City. We brought our nonprofits together. I think there are about 6 or 7 of us there. And I told everybody, I'll have the coffee and the donuts if you bring your calendars. And we sat around a table and just went around. I had everybody introduce, who you represent, and tell us one thing we may not know about your organization. And the lady that worked with a group of family, and so it's family nonprofit where they assist families. She said, we have this grant funding for people that want to start their own childcare business. We will help you get licensed. We'll help you get the right toys you need, put a fence up around the yard, make sure you're properly licensed to have kids there, and we'll help you do that. Now, nobody at the table knew that they had that. That's a big deal in a small town. That's not only providing childcare, but it's also providing workforce for someone that's staying at home that wants to take care of kids and make an income. So by bringing people together and talking about events and activities and what they have and what they don't have, you learn how to work together. Joe, if you're having an event on Saturday, the first Saturday in April, and so am I, both of us at noon. If we know about it, we can talk about either working together or staggering our times or doing them on different days. But if we're not in conversation, if we're still working in those silos, we're not going to be able to figure these things out. So bringing people together, having conversation is huge.
Really an interesting discussion, Deb. And in the couple of minutes we've got left, for a listener out there, and we're sort of in the beginning of the new calendar year, if you could tell them 2 or 3 things that you would recommend they do that they could get started on immediately to get those good, friendly ideals, what would you recommend to them?
I am actually, give me a second, top 10, we have an article, top 10 things to do when you want to help your small town, right?
Well, that's good.
I can send you that, by the way.
Yeah.
I should have had that pulled up. I'm sorry. So one of those things is have your own coffee and calendars gathering. Another one is if you want a new restaurant in town, why not take a table and call your brother-in-law and have him come sit outside on a nice day with you and eat sandwiches? People are going to stop and say, what are you doing? And you're going to say, this empty lot, wouldn't that be a good restaurant? So you're starting a conversation. And there's lots of things that you can do, and I'll send you that article.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. Well, Deb, I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and I know we're going to have many more conversations in the future. And
yes, sir.
And I just appreciate your passion for our small towns and our rural communities. If people want to find out more about you and Becky and y'all's work, is there a website they can go to?
Absolutely. So, and it's pretty simple. It's SaveYour.Town. So SaveYour .town, TOWN. Don't put a .com in there. Just put .town. And you'll see all about us. You can get our free newsletter every week. We talk about the idea of friendly method stories, real town results. You can find that kind of things, the survey results, how to work with us. We both have books out now, and some of the people that we've partnered with. All of that's on the website that you can take a look at.
Well, I encourage our listeners to do that. These ladies are wealth of knowledge and have been very successful. I also want to remind everyone we appreciate your questions or comments, and you can send that to us at RuralStrong@gmail.com. Deb Brown, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Joe Barker. My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Rural Strong. If you found this helpful, share it and follow the show for more insights from rural leaders making a real difference. Until next time, stay rural strong.